police officer finds Black Boy sleeping on the street every night, but when he learns his story, he can't hold back the tears. What if the life of a boy sleeping on the street could change the path of a lonely police officer? In the heart of Chicago, veteran officer James Calloway makes his night rounds, but the monotonous routine of his life is shaken when he spots a young black boy, Malik, just 13 years old, sleeping under an awning. With a tattered blanket and a worn backpack, Malik becomes a constant reminder of what James has lost, the connection with his own son. What seemed like just another case on the streets soon transforms into a moral dilemma that will challenge James's convictions and touch his heart in ways he never imagined. James, a man in his 50s, carries the weight of a failed marriage and the pain of being estranged from his only child. The loneliness that surrounds him is palpable, and Malik's presence brings old wounds to the surface. Although he wishes to help the boy, Malik's distrust makes him pull back. Observing the boy day after day, James realizes that Malik lives with a watchful eye, as if he is always running from something. This constant vigilance reflects a life of fears and traumas that James cannot ignore. The relationship between the two begins to develop when, after several failed attempts, Malik finally shares a little of his story. What James discovers is devastating. Malik has run away from a foster home where he suffered abuse and is now surviving on the streets, seeking a safe place in the darkness of the night. This revelation deeply affects James, who finds himself confronted with the reality of a flawed system, unable to protect children like Malik. He decides he cannot stand by, and the desire to act and change this situation drives him to investigate what is really happening with the boy. Throughout this journey, James meets Lisa Brooks, a social worker who is also seeking to make a difference. Together, they unite on a mission to rescue Malik, while James faces his own demons and seeks redemption through the protection of the boy. The connection between James and Malik becomes a tenuous line between recovery and loss, and each interaction brings them closer to an unlikely and transformative friendship. The backdrop of Chicago, with its bright lights and hidden darkness, serves as the setting for a story of overcoming, disillusionment, and hope. Millennium Park, where Malik sleeps, reflects the boy's vulnerability amid the city's hustle and bustle. As James navigates the challenges of the precinct and interactions with skeptical colleagues, he realizes that the fight for justice goes beyond a simple police case. It is a call to reconnect with what truly matters, the ability to care, love, and perhaps find a way back to his own son. Thus, James's journey is not just about saving Malik, but also about finding a new purpose in his life. What begins as a casual encounter transforms into a lesson about empathy, the fragility of childhood, and the strength that can arise from friendship. As James delves deeper into Malik's story, he finds himself challenged to re-evaluate his own choices and what it means to be a true father. What will be the outcome of this unexpected connection, and how can this friendship heal wounds that seemed impossible to mend? James Calloway felt the weight of loneliness as he walked the streets of Chicago. The biting cold of the night seeped into his coat, but there was something colder inside him, a sense of emptiness that felt impossible to fill. Upon spotting Malik for the first time, he couldn't imagine that this encounter would change his life in so many ways. The image of the boy sleeping under the awning haunted him, reminding him of the son he hadn't seen in years. He had never forgotten the look of disappointment on the boy's face when they were separated. Now, he found himself facing another young person whose life was in danger, and the emotional connection that formed was powerful and frightening. As the days passed, James decided he could no longer ignore Malik's presence. Curiosity turned into a need to understand what the boy was going through. However, as he approached, he encountered Malik's distrust, who kept his distance, as if fearing that any gesture of kindness might actually be a trap. James couldn't blame him. He knew the world could be cruel, especially for kids like Malik. But this resistance only made his mission even more challenging. That night, when he found Malik, James decided to try once more. He sat at a respectful distance and began to talk about the city, about life on the streets. The boy, initially hesitant, began to open up slowly. He shared fragments of his life, revealing that he had run away from a foster home where he had suffered abuse. Malik's words echoed despair, and James felt a wave of compassion but also frustration. How could anyone leave a child like this alone and unprotected? With the help of Lisa, the social worker he met in an unexpected encounter at the precinct, James began to devise a plan to help Malik. Lisa was a determined woman whose passion for caring for children made her a valuable ally. She understood the challenges of the foster care system and was willing to fight alongside James. Together, they became a team, but the journey was far from easy. James soon encountered resistance from his colleagues in the police force. Many saw Malik as just another case, a statistic in a city full of problems. This perspective not only frustrated James, but also made him feel increasingly isolated in his struggle. He wondered if he would be able to change the situation. Doubt haunted him like a shadow, and he began to question his own strength. Would he be able to overcome such a flawed system? In one of his conversations with Lisa, James expressed his insecurity. What if he failed? What if he couldn't protect him? The social worker looked into James's eyes and reminded him that change often began with a single act of courage. This idea resonated within him, but the pressure increased as the days went by. Every time he saw Malik, the boy's vulnerability hit him like a punch in the stomach. He couldn't let that young man become just another victim of neglect. James's moral dilemma intensified when he learned that Malik's foster home was still active and that the caregivers were being investigated for other complaints. The thought of the boy being sent back to that environment left him distressed. James couldn't accept that this child, who was now part of his life, could be forced to return to a place of pain. He decided he needed to act, but the urgency of the situation made him feel like he was racing against time. That night, while patrolling the streets, James found himself at a crossroads. He could follow the police guidelines, which encouraged him to keep his distance, or he could risk everything in the name of justice and what was right. What he didn't know was that this choice would not only determine Malik's fate, but also irrevocably change the course of his own life. The friendship that was beginning to blossom between them would be tested in ways that James could never have imagined. Looking at Malik, who was now increasingly becoming a part of his life, James realized he was approaching a point of no return. The connection he had formed with the boy was not just a matter of compassion, it was an opportunity to rediscover his own worth, to reconnect with what truly mattered. But as the challenges mounted, he wondered if he would have the strength to face not only the dangers of the world, but also the demons that inhabited his own soul. Would this be the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, or the end of a hope that was just beginning to sprout? As James Calloway ventured into the cold streets of Chicago, the weight of responsibility grew heavier with each passing day. Malik, with his story of pain and survival, had become a beacon amid his own darkness. However, with every step he tried to take toward a solution, obstacles arose challenging his convictions and testing his limits. The first major twist occurred when James received an unexpected phone call from Lisa. There was a new report about Malik's foster home, but the investigation was taking longer than expected. The caregivers were protected by a web of influences that made any immediate action difficult. Frustration overtook James. He felt powerless, as if he were fighting against an invisible monster. The idea that Malik could return to that terrifying place left him restless. The boy depended on him, and the pressure mounted. Each day, James grew closer to Malik, and the friendship between them became a refuge. The boy began to trust him, sharing more about his fears and hopes. But as this connection deepened, so did James's anxiety. He couldn't fail. The image of the son he hadn't seen in years, with whom he never had the chance to reconcile, haunted him. He didn't want to repeat the same mistakes. In meetings with Lisa, James began to realize the magnitude of the task ahead of him. The policies of the foster care system were complex and often cold. He felt like a castaway in a sea of bureaucracy, struggling to stay afloat. Lisa, on the other hand, was determined and full of ideas, but even she acknowledged that the road would be long and fraught with challenges. With each new piece of information they received, James felt as though they were taking one step forward and two steps back. One morning, while James was patrolling, he came across something that left him in shock. A news report on TV about a recent abuse case in a foster home. James's heart raced. He thought of Malik, and the urgency to protect him intensified. He needed to act, but how? The idea of taking Malik to a safe place seemed like an impossible mission. The fear of making another mistake, of risking the life of a child who had already suffered so much, paralyzed him temporarily. Days turned into weeks, and the emotional pressure began to affect James physically. He couldn't sleep properly, and anxiety made him lose his appetite. The effects of this internal battle became visible. His co-workers began to notice his lack of focus, and murmurs of concern started to spread. James knew he needed to stay strong, but with each passing day, he felt closer to a breakdown. In a moment of desperation, James decided to open up to one of his patrol partners, Tom, a man with whom he shared a camaraderie. Tom, always pragmatic, listened attentively. "You can't carry this alone, Calloway. There are limits to what we can do. Sometimes you need to ask for help." Tom's words resonated in his mind, and the idea that he wasn't alone brought some relief, but also a new doubt. How far was he willing to go to help Malik? Before we continue with this thrilling story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know in the comments which city you're watching this video from. The challenges heightened even more when Malik, in a moment of vulnerability, revealed that he was being chased by a group of local youths who did not accept his presence on the streets. This revelation hit James like a punch in the stomach. The responsibility he felt transformed into a palpable fear. The boy he was trying to protect was in real danger, and the only thing he could do was offer comfort and hope. The emotional tension grew, and in one of their conversations, Malik asked James if he would stand by his side, even if everything fell apart. The question caught him off guard, and he realized that the friendship forming between them was more than just a simple connection. It was a commitment. The tears in Malik's eyes were a painful reminder of the fragility of that moment. With renewed determination, James decided he needed to take action. But what did that mean? He could no longer just watch. He needed to infiltrate the system, seek support, create a movement that could lead to real change. But this new approach required courage and a willingness to face not only external challenges, but also his own internal fears. As the days passed, James began to question if he was ready for this fight. He felt torn between the need to protect Malik and the doubt that consumed him. Would he be strong enough to face the approaching storm? Despair and hope danced in his mind, and each choice became heavier. The journey he and Malik were about to embark on was not just about finding safety, but about rediscovering not only friendship but also faith in the goodness of the world. And so, James prepared for the next step, where each decision could change their fate. As James Calloway prepared for another day of patrol, an unexpected call from Lisa brought with it a burden he was not prepared to bear. The tone of her voice was grave, and the urgency in her words made James's heart race. There was a new report about Malik's foster home, but what really shook him was the news that Malik could be transferred back to that place. The feeling of helplessness that James already knew intensified, and he realized he was at a crucial point in his journey. When he hung up the phone, he felt the weight of responsibility like an anchor in his chest. The boy he had promised to protect was more vulnerable than ever. He imagined Malik, with his shy smile and hopeful eyes, being thrown back to a place where pain and fear reigned. This terrifying vision made James reconsider his choices. He could not allow that to happen. He did not want to be just another adult who failed to protect a child. That morning, as he walked through the cold streets, James felt torn. He knew he needed to act quickly, but how? The options seemed limited, and the consequences of each choice were enormous. The pressure to do the right thing consumed him, and amid the emotional chaos he remembered Malik. The boy trusted him, and that trust was a burden, but also a strength. What James did not expect was that fate would present him with an even more unexpected twist. While talking to Malik in a park, the boy, visibly distressed, revealed that he had found a hidden diary in his old foster home. He hesitated to tell James, but the need to share that secret became greater than his fear. The diary contained notes from a child who had lived there before Malik, and the stories of suffering and abuse were heart-wrenching. The revelation of the diary was a shock to James. Each page that Malik read seemed like a desperate cry for help, and the reality of what was happening behind the walls of that house became increasingly clear. James felt a chill run down his spine. He was dealing with something much bigger than he had imagined. The words of the diary haunted him, and he realized that the fight was not just for Malik, but for all the children who went through similar experiences. Emotion overwhelmed James, and he found himself in a whirlwind of feelings. It was not just concern for Malik that dominated him, but a wave of guilt for not having realized the gravity of the situation sooner. He thought of his son, the relationship he never had the chance to mend, and the pain of not having been present when they needed him the most. Malik, in a way, was a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently. But now he felt that he had failed again. The determination that had guided him thus far began to waver. How could he confront such a corrupt and fortified system? The idea of exposing the diary and what he had discovered could bring dangerous consequences, not only for him, but for Malik. The emotional pressure was so intense that James almost wished everything would just disappear. He felt small, insignificant in the face of such a large problem. However, amid this despair, something began to change within him. The image of Malik, holding the diary with tears in his eyes, brought a new clarity. The boy was not just a victim, he was a symbol of resistance. James understood that his fight was not just for Malik's safety, but to give a voice to all those who could not speak. What had once seemed an insurmountable mountain was now transforming into a mission that required courage and commitment. With this new perspective, James decided he needed to act strategically. He could not allow fear to paralyze him. He remembered Tom's words about sharing the burden of his worries. James began to plan how he could mobilize resources and support, how to gather allies who believed in the cause. His vision of success began to change. It was no longer about a personal victory, but about a movement that could transform lives. That day, James made a promise to himself and to Malik. He would not give up. He would fight not only for them, but for all the children who needed protection and love. The friendship that had formed between him and Malik would become the driving force of his battle. The change would not be easy, but James knew he now had a greater purpose. The journey was just beginning, and he was determined to face the challenges that lay ahead. James felt the weight of the decision he had made. The promise he had made to Malik echoed in his mind, but the reality of his situation was becoming increasingly challenging. In the days that followed the discovery of the diary, he plunged into a sea of planning and research. He knew he needed to gather evidence and support to confront the system that seemingly ignored the suffering of children, but every step he took seemed to lead to new obstacles. The first difficulty arose in the form of resistance. When James decided to share his findings with some colleagues, he encountered skeptical and indifferent looks. Many thought the problem was too big to be solved by a single individual. This discouraged him. He thought of Malik and the pain he might be facing. With every dismissive remark he received, James felt the boy's voice silencing a little more. He needed allies, but how could he convince people to care? That night, while reviewing the diary notes, James couldn't help but let the tears stream down his face. The stories of suffering and abuse haunted his mind. He felt powerless, as if he were in a maze with no exit. Malik, on the other hand, seemed increasingly anxious, as if he sensed the pressure that James was trying to hide. The boy often sought him out, looking for comfort and security, but James knew he couldn't provide the answer that Malik needed. In a moment of introspection, James decided he needed to open up to someone he trusted. He sought out Lisa, the social worker who had always supported him. When he found her, he shared his concerns and the discoveries from the diary. Lisa listened attentively, but in the end, her expression was one of worry. "James, you know this could have serious consequences, right? The system doesn't handle well those who challenge its norms." James felt a chill run down his spine upon hearing those words. He knew he was playing a risky game, but if he did nothing, he would be failing Malik and all the children who had suffered before him. The fight was becoming even more personal. He not only wanted to protect Malik, but he also wanted to make a difference. The responsibility weighed heavily on his shoulders, and the thought of failing again left him distressed. In the following days, James decided to take bolder steps. He began meeting with other child rights advocates, people who had already faced the system and understood their struggles. It was a small group, but each member had a heart passionate about the cause. They shared experiences and strategies, and James felt that for the first time he was surrounded by people who truly cared. Yet even so, doubt still haunted him. Would it be enough? With the group's support, James felt more encouraged to expose the diary and his findings. However, before he could act, a new complication arose. He received a notification that Malik had been summoned to a meeting with social workers. Fear took hold of James. He knew the boy could be pressured to return to the foster home. The urgency of the situation required immediate action. The night before the meeting, James found Malik in the park where they usually met. The boy was restless, fidgeting with his hands and looking at the ground. James sat down beside him and in a soft voice asked what he was thinking. Malik hesitated but eventually opened his heart. He was afraid of not being heard, of no one caring about what he had to say. James felt a wave of empathy, and it motivated him even more. He needed to ensure that Malik knew his voice mattered. "You are stronger than you think, Malik," James said, holding the boy's hand. "Together, we can make a difference. No one can take your voice away from you." On the morning of the meeting, James was nervous. He knew he needed to be cautious but also determined. He prepared to advocate for Malik, to ensure that his story was heard. However, upon entering the room, the atmosphere was tense. The social workers looked at him with distrust, and James felt his heart race. He was about to face a system that was not friendly. But looking at Malik, who was sitting beside him, a new strength arose within him. He could not fail. The meeting was an emotional battleground. James laid out his concerns and what he had discovered in the diary. Every word that left his mouth was an attempt to break down the barriers surrounding Malik. But the social workers were prepared. They questioned his intentions and tried to discredit his concerns. Frustration was building inside James, but he remembered the promise he had made. He would not give up. At that moment, James realized that his fight was not just against a system, but for a better future for Malik and all the children in similar situations. Even under pressure, he stood firm, determined to give voice to those who could not speak. The journey was just beginning, and every battle, no matter how small, counted. James felt the weight of his decisions, but in that moment, something inside him began to change. The promise to Malik was not just a commitment, it had become a driving force. He realized that by facing his fears and the system's resistance, he was transforming. What was once a shadow of doubt was now becoming a light of hope. In the meeting, the words of the social workers were like stones, difficult to ignore. They questioned his intentions, trying to discredit his passion. But James took a deep breath and remembered those afternoons in the park, where Malik shared his fears and hopes. The stories he had learned in the journal came to life, and the urgency of their struggle became clearer with each passing moment. He was not just fighting for Malik, he was fighting for all the children who, like Malik, felt invisible. By standing firm, James began to notice something new within himself. He was no longer just a passive observer. He was becoming an active advocate. The insecurity that once dominated him was replaced by the courage to expose himself. He realized that by giving voice to Malik, he was also giving voice to himself. This new perspective made him reflect on his own life experiences, on how many times he had hidden behind fear, allowing doubt to overpower him. After the meeting, despite the difficulties, something changed. James began to trust more in his abilities and in the importance of his struggle. He accepted that he didn't have to face everything alone. Lisa, the child rights advocates, and even Malik were allies who helped him navigate this difficult path. This acceptance brought unexpected relief. He was no longer alone, there was a group supporting him, and that motivated him to move forward. As James continued his fight, he also faced new challenges. The system's resistance was great, but the need for change was even greater. He began to understand that success was not only measured in individual victories, but in building a support network and transforming lives. Every small step he took, every child he helped, was a victory in itself. This new view of success made him feel more connected to his mission. James's growth was not limited to the external struggle. He began to reflect on his emotions and deal with his own fears. The tears that once fell in moments of despair now became tears of determination. He learned to channel his frustration into action. Instead of letting difficulties bring him down, James began to apply the lessons he learned each day. He discovered that true growth came from overcoming, from resilience, and from the ability to turn pain into strength. His friendship with Malik deepened. The boy who had once been just a case to James had now become a dear friend. Together, they shared laughter and tears, and this connection helped both of them grow. Malik, with his innocence and courage, inspired James to keep fighting, while James, in turn, provided Malik with the safety and confidence he desperately needed. This unlikely friendship not only provided emotional support, but also became a symbol of hope. When they looked at each other, James and Malik realized that their battles were interconnected. The boy, who had once felt small and insignificant, now saw that his voice mattered, and James, who was fighting his own demons, found a greater purpose in his life. Together, they were ready to face the system, and the journey ahead was filled with challenges but also with infinite possibilities. James was no longer the same. He had transformed from a hesitant man into a fearless advocate. The weight of responsibility still existed, but now he carried it with pride and determination. He knew that no matter what happened, the fight for Malik and for all the children who needed help was a battle worth fighting. And with this new understanding, James was ready to continue his journey, facing each challenge with the strength that now emerged from within him. James was about to face the biggest challenge of his life. The room was full and the atmosphere was heavy. He felt as if he were about to take a step into the unknown, but at the same time, There was a flame of determination burning inside him. The audience was not just composed of social workers and government officials. There were also media representatives who were there to report on Malik's situation and that of other children in similar circumstances. What was at stake was the possibility of change, and he knew he needed to be the voice that these children could not be. With controlled breathing, James stood up. He was no longer hesitant. He was an advocate now, and the transformation he had undergone prepared him for this moment. Looking at Malik, who was sitting in the front row, James felt the strength of the friendship they had built. He was more than just a case, he was a friend, a brother, and that motivated him to speak. "I am here today to speak for Malik and for all the children who feel invisible," he began, his voice steady. "For too long the system has failed to protect them, to listen to them. Malik is not just a statistic. He is a human being with dreams, fears, and hopes. He deserves a chance." James's words echoed through the room. Some social workers exchanged skeptical glances, but he did not let that shake him. He continued talking about the afternoons he had spent with Malik, the stories the boy had shared, and how those experiences changed his life. He described Malik's struggle to be heard, to be seen as someone who mattered. "If we do not act now, we will be losing not only Malik, but thousands of other children who need our help. We need a system that not only works, but works for everyone," he said, his voice growing in passion. "We need to be the change we want to see." The tension in the room was rising. James realized he was touching on something deep. He saw some faces light up, and that gave him more courage. But there was also resistance, and he knew he needed to confront it. One of the social workers, a middle-aged man, stood up and questioned, "Do you really believe you can change the system? What do you have to offer that hasn't already been tried before?" James felt the provocation, but he did not back down. "I'm not an expert, but I am someone who cares, and that makes all the difference. Each of us has the capacity to make a difference. If we all work together, we can create a new path. I'm not just speaking for myself, but for everyone who feels powerless. We must unite and fight for a better future." The room fell silent. He could feel the tension, but also a new energy in the air. He looked at Malik again and saw the boy watching him with hope. That connection propelled him further. "These children need support, love, and a system that sees them. I'm not a hero, but I'm willing to fight for them. And if I can do that, then we all can do the same." James's words reverberated in the room. The criticisms began to turn into support. The resistance of the man who had questioned started to crumble. He realized there was something authentic in what James was saying, something that could not be ignored. Empathy began to blossom in those cold, bureaucratic walls. As the meeting neared its end, James felt he had achieved something. He had not only presented Malik's story, but had also given a voice to all who were silent. He realized that true change would not come only from laws or regulations, but from the courage of people uniting around a common cause. He had become a catalyst, and that filled him with indescribable pride. At the end, as people began to stand up, Malik approached James with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, James, you made me feel like I matter." James smiled, feeling the weight of his journey dissipate. He was no longer alone. The fight for Malik and all the children had turned into a collective mission. The change was difficult and long, but now there was a path ahead, and James was ready to walk it. He had learned that in overcoming his fears and advocating for others, he had found his true strength. The room, once cold and indifferent, now pulsed with the possibility of a brighter future, and this was just the beginning. After the meeting, the atmosphere in the room began to change. People were more open, more willing to listen. James, still feeling the adrenaline from his presentation, realized that the words he had spoken not only touched hearts, but were also planting seeds of change. He saw some social workers gathering in small groups, discussing ideas about how they could improve the situation for children like Malik. It was a sign that something was truly starting to happen. Malik, with bright eyes and a shy smile, walked alongside James, still absorbing everything that had happened. "Do you think they will really do something?" the boy asked, hope mixed with a hint of doubt. James stopped, looking at Malik sincerely. "I believe so. We started a conversation, and that's the first step. Now it's up to us to keep that conversation alive." In the following days, James received messages of support and encouragement from people who were at the meeting. Some even asked him to share his story in other forums, seeking more support for the cause. The impact of his speech resonated, and he felt like a true agent of change. However, he knew that the road ahead would not be easy. Promises made in meetings often got lost in bureaucracy. On a sunny afternoon, as James and Malik sat in a park, the boy began to talk about his dreams. "I want to be an artist. I want to tell stories through painting," Malik said, looking at the sky. James smiled, remembering how not too long ago Malik struggled to feel heard. Now he was expressing himself, and that was a sign of victory. "You can do that, Malik, and I'll be here to support you no matter what," James promised. The conversation flowed naturally, and Malik opened up more about his fears and hopes. For James, each word was a reminder of why he had stood up in that room. He thought of all the children who still didn't have someone to hear their stories. "If we all become a voice, we can make a real difference," James reflected, feeling a new determination. However, not everything was easy. In the following days, James had to face the resistance of some community members who were unwilling to change. He attended meetings where apathy and skepticism were palpable, but instead of getting discouraged, he remembered Malik and so many others who depended on him. He began to organize community gatherings where people could come together and discuss how they could turn their concerns into concrete actions. At one of those meetings, a woman raised her hand and said, "I don't know if we can really change the system. It's too complicated." James listened to her attentively before responding. "Change doesn't happen overnight, but if we start to act one step at a time, we can create a new path. Every small effort counts." He saw looks of understanding spreading across the room. The words seemed to resonate, and the sense of community began to blossom. James's life began to change as well. He became an active advocate, attending events, speaking at schools, and organizing campaigns to raise funds and raise awareness about the situation of at-risk children. The challenges he faced only made him stronger. He realized that change needed to be persistent and, above all, collective. One night, while reviewing his notes, James received a message from Malik. The boy had created a painting inspired by his journey, representing not only his struggle, but also his hope. Looking at the image, James felt a wave of emotion. Malik's art was a symbol of everything they had fought for together. It was proof that despite the challenges, there was light at the end of the tunnel. James sent the reply, telling Malik he was incredible. His art could touch many lives. He knew he was just at the beginning of a long journey, but now he was no longer alone. He had Malik, and together they were ready to make a difference, one step at a time. The fight for a better future continued, but hope was already blossoming. James was at a crossroads. The journey he had started by talking about Malik and his experiences had profoundly transformed him. He was no longer the same man who just wanted to make a difference. Now he was a catalyst for change, an advocate inspiring others to unite for a greater cause, and as he reflected on everything he had experienced, he realized that his struggle was also an internal battle. He had overcome his fears and insecurities, finding a purpose that drove him every day. With Malik's support and the growing community around him, James began to see the changes he had longed for. Meetings that were once filled with skepticism were now spaces of collaboration and hope. People of different ages and backgrounds came together with a common goal: to improve the lives of at-risk children. Malik's art, which had germinated as a mere expression of his feelings, had now become a symbol of resistance and courage. People began to be inspired by Malik's story, reigniting the flame of hope in many hearts. Over time, James realized that true revenge was not against the system that had frustrated him, but against apathy. He decided that instead of succumbing to discouragement, he would show that change was possible. He organized a large art exhibition where Malik's works and those of other children were displayed. The event attracted media attention, and for the first time, the challenges faced by these children were in the spotlight. The community came together, and the voices that had once been silenced now echoed throughout the city. The success of the exhibition brought new opportunities. Donations began to flow in, and as a result, programs for vulnerable children started to be implemented. James saw the impact of his struggle materializing in the lives of so many children. They were receiving support, resources, and, above all, the chance to be heard. It was a victory not just for Malik, but for all those yearning for change. Looking back, James understood that the true meaning of success was not in accolades or recognition, but in the transformation he had helped create. Each smile from a child receiving support was a reward greater than any prize. The journey taught him that perseverance and solidarity were the keys to building a better future. He learned that friendship and teamwork could overcome any obstacle. The story of James and Malik was not just about fighting against an unjust system, but also about how human connection can heal and transform lives. Their friendship was a testament to the power of empathy and understanding. James was determined to continue this fight, knowing that there would always be more children like Malik needing a voice. With a heart full of gratitude and determination, James invited everyone to join him on this journey. He knew that each person had a story, a struggle, and a dream, and by sharing these experiences, they could create a wave of change. He challenged everyone, let's make a difference together. Each of us can be a voice. Share your story, inspire others, and help keep this flame alive. Together we can transform the world. James said goodbye, certain that his journey was far from over. And so, he extended an invitation to all who heard him. If you believe you can make a difference, sign up, like, and share. Let's spread this message and unite forces for a better future. The time to act is now.